Hello, my name is TSW and welcome to my Mists of Pandaria video guide for the warrior tank. In this video I will go through the changes that have occurred to warriors and how to hit the floor running when playing Mists of Pandaria. We have lots of new abilities, had to say goodbye to some, work with a whole new talent system, manage our rage differently and more. This guide will help you if you're a World of Warcraft beginner just learning the ropes or if you're the guild's main tank progressing through heroic content. So let's start off with the guide. Spells that have been taken out regarding tanking are as follow: Retaliation, Insight, Tactical Mastery, Challenging Shout, ENRAGED, Intercept, Concussion Blow, and Rend. The new abilities are Throw, Banners, Symbiosis, Shield Barrier, and Ultimatum. Not to mention the new talent system introducing more than 10 new spells, the glyphs and existing spells that have changed. So let's go through all the spells you'll be using, what they do, and if they have changed, how so. Battle and Commanding Shout. Our battle and commanding shouts have changed to give us 20 rage and increasing party and rage attack power by 10% or stamina by 10%, sharing the same 1 minute cooldown. These shouts are used before combat and refreshing the buff if it's ending, also a great source of rage when shield slam is on cooldown, or a global filler if not in melee range. As with many abilities, glyphs can give variations on how the ability works and overall how the class is played and how it plays out. And it just so happens that there's a glyph for Commanding Shout and Battle Shout. Glyph of Hoarse Voice reduces the cooldown and rage generation of your battle and commanding shout by 50%. This could only come in handy if you are rage starved often and want a little bit more rage frequently, but that would mean that you're failing to play correctly elsewhere, so this glyph is virtually useless. Berserker Rage. Berserker Rage has now become a quality cooldown instead of granting us extra rage when attacked pre-mop, now capitalises on a 10% increase to physical damage lasting 6 seconds, and a flat 10 rage per use, whilst remaining to grant immunity to fear, sap, and incapacitate effects for its duration. This is great, as we don't have to just rely on critical blocks enraging us through our passive, Enrage. Saving this spell for any encounter that involves fear, sap, or incapacitate effects is a no-brainer, but many incapacitate PvE effects are immune to Berserker Rage. Using this every cooldown will noticeably increase your damage, but timing it well with executes, Skull Banner, and other cooldowns can see your threat and damage skyrocketing. Glyph of Enraged Speed increases movement speed by 20% and stacks with things like movement speed enchant on feet. Not a glyph you'll see me using often at all. Warriors have a lot of mobility as it is, without needing what would be an almost random extra boost for the cost of a major glyph slot. Charge. A great combat opener and mobility tool now grants us 20 rage and can be configured with many glyphs and talents. Pick a combination to suit your playstyle and needs. Glyph of Long Charge, increasing the range from 25 to 30 yards. Glyph of Blitz, allowing our 1 second stun from charge to affect 2 other mobs. Glyph of Bull Rush, promoting our rage increase from 20 to 35. The first tier of talents unlocked at level 15 consist of the following passive spells. Juggernaut, shaves 8 seconds off the 20-second cooldown. Double Time, enabling us to charge twice, but each application of charge still having a 20-second cooldown and only receiving rage after a 12-second internal cooldown. Warbringer, increasing the 1 second stun to 3. Charge is used to begin combat with single target mobs and grants us enough rage unglyphed to use shield barriers straight away to delay damage income. In conjunction with our other mobility tools, charge helps us get from one side of the battlefield to the other very effectively. Double charge and heroic leap and intervene. That's a lot of mobility. Cleave and heroic strike. The cooldown's been dropped from 3 seconds to 1.5 seconds. Ultimatum gives our shield slam a 30% chance to free up the 30 rage cost. Cleave still being used for our primary aggressive AoE rage dump, and heroic strike for single target rage dump. When you don't want to spend your rage on shield barriers or shield blocks, heroic strike can help boost your damage and threat. Cleave for multiple target tanking. Without having a GCD, these two moves can be implemented seamlessly, assuming you have rage. Glyph of Hindering Strikes. When using Cleave or Heroic Strike, this glyph reduces the victim's speed by 50% for 8 seconds. If the glyph seems like something you would like, think of it as a hamstring that costs more rage but does more damage. However, for the vast majority of tanking, this glyph will not be used. Deadly Calm now reduces the rage cost of our next 3 heroic strikes or cleave by 10, lasting 9 seconds with a 1 minute cooldown. This can be easily macroed if you don't want to manage another spell, but it can be most valuable when trying to burst threat or damage. I would recommend an add-on notifying you when it's active, so you know when your heroic strikes and cleave are being reduced in cost if you choose to macro it. I personally don't, as I like to be in control of when it occurs. However, it requires getting into the habit of using it frequently before using heroic strikes and cleaves, or it becomes dusty from the lack of use in my experience. Demoralizing Shout. Now with a 1 minute cooldown, reduces damage done to you by 20% for 10 seconds from all enemies within 10 yards, and it's off the global cooldown. Again, this is only a debuff that reduces spell and physical damage to you, so don't waste it when you're not tanking anything. For those times when you don't have enough rage for block or barrier and doesn't warrant the use of shield wall. Much like Berserker Rage, if you're struggling to manage this spell, get into the habit of using it every cooldown when you're tanking, but again, planning when you use it makes this spell a lot more powerful. Devastate. Causes the Deep Wounds debuff and Weakened Armor debuff. This is your global filler. I will speak more about rotation in the 3rd chapter. Devastate is also the cause of Sword and Board, granting a 30% chance per use to reset the cooldown of Shield Slam and increasing the amount of rage Shield Slam grants by 5, totaling 25. Deep Wounds. Your Devastate and Thunderclap cause victims to bleed for physical damage over 15 seconds. You don't need to do anything with Deep Wounds, but be aware that it's there and boost your AoE damage by a lot. Make sure you use Thunderclap a lot when around lots of mobs. Weakened Armor. Weakens the armor of the target by 4% for 30 seconds, and stacks up to 3 times. You will sometimes hear this debuff being called Sunder Armor, as we used to have a similar spell. One of the first things you'll want to do to help the rest of your raid or party is to Devastate to reach 3 stacks of Weakened Armor. This greatly boosts the damage of physical attacks. Disarm. For the cost of a global cooldown, you can disarm the target for 10 seconds every minute. This is a largely underrated ability in PvE and stops a large amount of damage. Disarm can also stop a great deal of cleaving when moving targets close to raid members. Execute. With a static rage cost of 30 and does a lot of damage, well worth using sub 20% instead of Heroic Strike. There's not a lot more to say. Stockpiling rage can be beneficial when you want to max damage. If you're not in fear of dying, pop Recklessness and Skull Banner. Hamstring. Unchanged from previous expansions, Hamstring slows the target by 50% for 15 seconds for the cost of 10 rage and a global. Not used too much for me, as bosses can't be slown, and against trash packs, if I'm having to kite, I will almost always go for Piercing Howl. Glyph of Hamstring. When spending rage to apply Hamstring, the following Hamstring is free. Heroic Leap. A fantastic spell to get us warriors in and out of combat situations, being better than a charge to open up a multi-mob pack, costing no rage or global cooldown. Heroic Leap is a spell to be reckoned with. The glyph Death from Above reduces the cooldown of Heroic Leap from 45 seconds to 30 and doubling the damage, making this spell on cooldown even better for those AoE situations. Not to mention lots of cool little tricks that Heroic Leap can do, the most useful being never taking fall damage again. Heroic Throw. Versus Devastate for a global filler, it fails. However, with a 30-yard range and no rage cost, it's your global filler when you're out of melee range. Glyph of Gag Order. Grants a 3-second silence to the target of your Heroic Throw and Pummel. Only good versus mobs that spam spells, and means that your Heroic Throw is now an interrupt. Intimidating Shout. One of the most underused spells, and I can see why. To pull it off requires a lot of awareness. Once used on a target, it will stand still and cower in fear, unable to attack or move until attacked itself by any form of damage, and up to 5 additional mobs within 8 yards of you will run away in fear for 8 seconds. Using Intimidating Shout can be a real lifesaver, but use it too close to an unaggroed mob pack and you'll find yourself running. As with all fears in the game, it's hard to tell how far the enemies will run. Because of this, you need to be confident that you won't make things worse. Glyph of Intimidating Shout. To stop mobs running away, you can pick up this glyph, and all feared enemies will cower in fear and stand still. Note, this is a minor glyph. Much less fun and doesn't disperse the enemies. In certain situations, you would rather have this not glyphed, as the mobs will run away from you for the 8-second duration of the fear, and have to run back, increasing the time window you aren't being attacked. Pummel. A 15-second cooldown interrupt, free from rage cost and global cooldown. It also locks out the School of Magic that it interrupts by 4 seconds. A solid interrupt. Don't forget, it's not just DPS that can interrupt. Stopping casters from attacking you, hopefully, as the tank, can reduce damage intake, or keep the fight as short as possible if they're trying to heal. Rude Interruption. When glyphed, your successful pummels will grant you an extra 6% damage for 20 seconds. However, be aware that because mobs don't attack whilst casting, interrupting as late as you can will delay their next attack. Shattering Throw. Reduces the armor of the target by 20%, or if they're using an immunity, it will purge the effect, such as Ice Block or Paladin Bubble, with a rage cost of 25, a 1.5 second cast, and a 5-minute cooldown. Use this when you aren't tanking the boss, either just before or during Lust Hero, at a time when the rest of the raid would benefit most from it. Spell Reflection. Reflects the next spell on you for 5 seconds, free from a GCD and rage cost with a 25-second cooldown. Considering it's free from rage and GCD, this spell isn't used so much, and it should be used more by the average warrior. Lots of boss abilities aren't reflectable, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try on every first attempt, much like Disarm. But when it does work, the damage booster can be nice, and who doesn't like a warrior fireballing, not to mention the fact that you're not actually taking the damage. Taunt. Taunt allows us to grab aggro of a mob instantly, with an 8-second cooldown and 30-yard range. Taunt will have all those bosses running straight for you to give you big hugs and kisses. If a member of your party pulls aggro off you, or if you're raiding with another tank and they're dying, using Taunt will focus the target to attack you. Throw. If you want to keep an enemy at range in combat or deal a very small amount of damage at range, you can use Throw. Some may wonder why on earth we have this spell, but I'm glad we do. If you are ever in an encounter where you can attack the target, but you can't get in melee range, assuming you don't need to move, spam the hell out of this half-second cast range ability, after using your heroic throw of course. Thunderclap. Thunderclap has an 8-yard range, costs no rage, has a 6-second cooldown, as well as applying its own damage, also applies the Weakened Blows debuff for 30 seconds to all targets affected by Thunderclap. Weakened Blows reduces the physical damage by the victim by 10%. Much like Devastate, Thunderclap with the protection passive Blood and Thunder also applies the Deep Wounds debuff. However, unlike Devastate, Thunderclap affects multiple targets at once. Use Thunderclap a lot in AoE situations and apply the debuff as early as you feel comfortable in a single target encounter. And remember to keep this debuff on the boss from the first phase to the looting phase. Resonating Power. This can be great if you don't need to rely on Thunderclap for picking up any stray mobs. Increasing the cooldown means using it less often, which is a two-sided sword. You save globals by not having to use it as often while maintaining the same damage and threat. But one of the best things about Thunderclap is its short duration for grabbing snap aggro. If you can live with the longer cooldown and are wondering which glyph to get, this can surprise you in terms of burst threat and damage. War Banners. Each share a separate 3-minute cooldown and can be intervened, off the global cooldown, cost no rage, and affect all enemies or friendlies within the respective range. Mocking Banner. An AoE taunting banner that sends all mobs within 15 yards of the banner for 6 seconds to the warrior who threw it down. The banner can be thrown up to 30 yards. We sadly said goodbye to Challenging Shout in Miss Pandaria, but hello Mocking Banner! This baby works out of line of sight and lasts 30 seconds. Assuming you are healed and all mobs are within the 15-yard range of the banner, you can AFK that trash pack and get yourself an IRL food buff out of the kitchen. Demoralizing Banner. Reduces the damage dealt by all enemies by 10% for the next 15 seconds, up to 30 yards from the banner, which can be thrown up to 30 yards away from the warrior. This does stack with Demoralizing Shout, and unlike Demo Shout, this will help others take reduced damage in parties and raids. Use this as a raid cooldown if the encounter requires. If not, you can use it with Demo Shout for a 30% reduced damage window, or on its own to even out incoming damage. Skull Banner. Drops down by your feet and cannot be thrown. This will increase the critical strike damage of party and raid members within 30 yards of the banner by 20% for 10 seconds. Make sure ranged are close enough to you when dropping this banner, and to make the most out of it, use with Recklessness. Last Stand. Increases current and maximum health by 30% for 20 seconds. Last Stand will take you from 1% health all the way up to 31, hopefully giving you enough time to be healed. If within the following 20 seconds you go under 30% health, Last Stand will have saved your life because you've gone down into the granted health. It's a lifesaver. If you ever find yourself low health, and as a tank I'd expect you to, using Last Stand is often the best course of action. Whereas moves like Shield Wall reduce damage, Last Stand simply grants you health points that the boss has to eat through before you're dead. Rallying Cry. Last Stand can't be mentioned without its raid cooldown counterpart, Rallying Cry. With a 3-minute cooldown, this raid saver increases the health of all party and raid members within 30 yards by 20% for 10 seconds. When the effect expires, the health is lost. Last Stand cannot be used within 10 seconds of Rallying Cry, and vice versa. For this reason, DPS warriors always rally and cry as a priority over tanking ones. Recklessness. Special or yellow abilities have a 50% increased chance to critically strike your foe for 12 seconds, with a 5-minute cooldown, no rage cost and no global cost. This is your primary DPS cooldown. Shield Wall. The staple cooldown for protection warriors, reducing all forms of damage taken within 12 seconds by 40%, and can be glyphed to reduce damage by an extra 20%, but at the cost of an extra 2 minutes cooldown. Use when you don't need to use Last Stand. A good time would be when you can predict damage, such as when a boss enrages, or when your hunter's pet ninja pulls another ad pack. Announcing to the party or raid when you're using cooldowns such as Shield Wall and Last Stand can be most beneficial. This can be done by in-game chat, via add-on, or through a microphone. Let them know you're going to be taking less damage for a period of time so they can adjust their heals accordingly. Shield Slam. Our best move for single target threat generation and rage generation. Shield Slam grants us 20 rage and has a 6-second cooldown. As mentioned previously, Sword and Board procs will reset the cooldown on Shield Slam. This is the most rage we can get in a single global when Sword and Board procs, and even if Sword and Board isn't active, it ties for first place, and with only a 6-second cooldown that's pretty good, and as such should be used on cooldown when striving for survivability. Shield Slam is also the most single target threat move we have. I will speak more about threat rotation in Chapter 3. Sword and Board. Devastate has a 30% chance of resetting the cooldown of your Shield Slam and increasing the rage it generates by 5, lasting 6 seconds. This ability means we can get a lot more use out of Shield Slam, and the extra rage is very welcome. Stances. Warriors have 3 stances, and as a protection warrior you almost exclusively use defensive. Defensive stance. Decreases damage taken by 25%, significantly increases threat generation, and generates 1 rage every 3 seconds in combat. This stance is pretty much the only one you'll need to use with regards to tanking. Battle Stance. Generates high rage from normal white swing melee attacks. Berserker Stance. Generates some rage from normal melee swings and some rage from damage taken. Rotation. Threat rotation. A warrior's single target threat rotation is as follows. Shield Slam while Sword and Board is active, followed by a regular Shield Slam, then Revenge, Battle or Commanding Shout, then Devastate, ending with one of our fillers. Shield Slam, as I said previously, has a 6-second cooldown. The global cooldown is 1.5 seconds, so after a Shield Slam you have 3 global cooldowns to fill before you know for certain your next Shield Slam is ready. If Revenge isn't ready, fall back on Battle or Commanding Shout, and if that's on cooldown, use your Devastate or another filler. Devastate has a 30% chance to proc Sword and Board, and if procced, use your Shield Slam and start your priority over again. If not, check to see if Revenge or Battle Commanding is ready. If not, Devastate again. You have now used 2 of the 3 global cooldowns on Devastate after your initial Shield Slam. This is now your filler window, the 3rd global. Again, if Revenge or Battle or Commanding Shout is ready, use them. If you want to use a global to do anything, this is your best opportunity, as whatever you spend this global on will never cost you incoming rage. Refreshing Thunderclap, for example, Shattering Throw if not tanking, or if the encounter allows Heroic Leap away and Charge at range. However, times such as when pulling, getting Weaken Blows up is more preferable unless you can guarantee the extra damage you take is worth it. For example, if you know you're going to not die, nor healer's mana going to dwindle. If you want as much rage income as possible, use Berserker Rage every cooldown so you know you have that 10 plus rage as often as possible during the encounter. However, you will most likely not be enraged if you want to use Enraged Regeneration. Never Heroic Strike nor Cleave when you want to maximise rage for block or barrier, only when Ultimatum procs or you can guarantee your survival. Glyph of Unending Rage is recommended in these situations when you can cap up to 120 rage, as this will be able to guarantee at least 2 shield blocks or 2 maxed out absorb shield barriers. To sum up, use this rotation to gain rage so you have the choice to use block or barrier to avoid damage, or spend on heroic strikes and cleave to deal damage. The choice of spending rage can change multiple times during combat, however for the most part of raiding you will want to be concentrating on survivability in the form of blocks and barrier. Loss of aggro. In a single target situation, if you ever lose threat or there's an aggro reset, simply using taunt is normally sufficient. If there is an aggro reset and the boss can't be taunted, using Shield Slam can be the best choice as it's a great aggro snap tool, meaning that it instantly grants a large amount of threat. However, if the target is a boss, which may be immune to taunt and most likely immune to slows, you're going to struggle attaining aggro again. Using Safeguard if spec'd or Vigilance can help out. Using Rallying Cry at moments like these can prove to be very beneficial. Make sure that if you are having trouble with aggro, let the rest of your party and raid know about it so they can help you with misdirections or simply waiting for you to build up aggro before DPS attack. I will go into more detail on what to do when you lose aggro of multiple mobs after talking about AoE rotation. AoE rotation. Shockwave does more threat initially than Thunderclap, so if you want snap aggro at the beginning of combat, then go for Shockwave, but if you want to take less damage from the very beginning, use Thunderclap to apply weakened blows. Thunderclap can also be a better option if you cannot guarantee hitting all the mobs with Shockwave. Either way, it is considered a good opener to use one of these spells followed by the other. If the encounter allows, on the pull, begin with Battle Shout, then Heroic Leaping on as many mobs as possible for a massive amount of AoE threat and damage. As long as you prioritise Thunderclap and Shockwave above anything else, you should be in good stead for AoE tanking. However, some rage generation would be nice, as well as being able to play a little bit more defensive. Next you want to prioritise Shield Slam. We know Shield Slam isn't an AoE ability, but we do know it's great for a lot of threat. To use this spell as best we can, aim for targeting the mob which you have the least amount of aggro for best results. When Thunderclap, Shockwave and Shield Slam are on cooldown, next use Revenge. If you're tanking a lot of melee, then the chances are you will be parrying a lot. This will reset the cooldown of Revenge, so make sure you're quick to react so you're not waiting on its cooldown if you go a long time without parrying after. This can sometimes mean if Thunderclap, Shockwave and Shield Slam are on cooldown, using Revenge again and again. When you can't use Revenge or any other spell in the priority so far, you can just use Devastate. This is the last ability in the priority system for AoE tanking, and so if you want to spend this time on another spell, feel free to do so, as this will have minimal effect on the rest of your AoE tanking. While you Shield Slam and Revenge, you will be gaining Rage. If you are being healed and there is almost no chance of you dying, then you can spend your Rage on Cleaves. Cleaving is better than Heroic Strike for the simple fact that it attacks multiple mobs at once, but a lot of the time, as a tank, there is a risk that you will die, and so using Shield Block or Shield Barrier are best moves for this time. When you have the basics of AoE tanking down and feel confident, you can then spice things up by using Heroic Leap and Berserker Rage. As always, be mindful that even if there's a very slim chance of you needing these spells, if you are feared or need to move somewhere else and you don't have them on cooldown. What I like to do is, if I know the encounter well and I'm confident with knowing where the adds are that I need to tank, how many there are, and are there any respawns, and is it likely for anyone in the group to accidentally pull more adds, then I'll tend to use almost all of my AoE cooldowns on a single pack. Especially if the next pull is going to be a boss that I know I won't have to tank any adds in the encounter. So if you're tanking one single pack in a 5-man and there's another pack of adds on the other side of the room and you're pugging the heroic for example, then there is some chance a ninja pull may occur, so bear that in mind. The first decision is whether to heroic leap or charge in. Heroic leap, as I mentioned, will give you a good amount of threat straight away and nice damage. However, charge will give me rage, which means I can use shield block or shield barrier earlier. Or, if I don't need either, I know the rage won't be wasted as I can use it on cleaves. The difference between charging and leaping isn't huge, but be aware of it. Most warriors will tend to leap into AoE packs because of the extra threat that will be generated. In the minimal difference in damage you take as a warrior versus the possibility of an uncertainty of one or more mobs being aggroed by a DPS. Then, if like most of the time you wish to continue gaining threat instead of playing defensively, use a shockwave thunderclap combo for the next 2 globals and proceed to shield slam the mob that you have the least amount of threat on. Generally speaking, a thunderclap shockwave combo will grant you enough aggro on all mobs in most cases, so you don't need to be discouraged if you aren't currently playing a warrior tank or have no experience on how easy AoE tanking at a basic level can be. So the mobs are attacking you. If not all targets were hit by your thunderclap and shockwave, here are some tips to make sure you hit them all the time. The trick with shockwave is as a frontal cone AoE, it's obviously getting the targets in front of you. This can be easily attained by taking a step back by using the S key by default. This will force all the mobs in front of you instead of being spread around you. This is often the case when you heroic leap into the middle of a pack. You will almost always see me taking a step or 2 back when I'm waiting for the global cooldown on shockwave, if the targets aren't already in the sweet spot in front of me. Mobs take time to run, and if this is any more than half a second or so, then forget about trying to get the ideal shockwave off and use Thunderclap. Thunderclap is a radial AoE, and you'll quickly be able to visualize the 8-yard range to get some much needed instant aggro in the first few seconds of attacking an AoE pack. Then take your step back if needed and then shockwave. So you should now have your AoE opener sorted. What I personally do is see which target is being nuked down first by the DPS and smash it with my first shield slam so I know I can build some single target threat on it. This isn't as crucial for pre-raid and heroic dungeons, as I say, AoE tanking for the most part is straightforward. So let's say one of the mobs has been pulled away from you and is now aggroed on a DPS. You can throw caps lock on and tell him he's not attacking your target and that he's a noob, or you can either click on the target, or if the mob in question is closest to you, hit the tab key by default to target the closest hostile to you, then taunt it back. If everything else is going swimmingly, then I will try and hit a few single target abilities on said mob, such as shield slam, to ensure aggro isn't pulled again. But this can be more reliably seen by using a threat meter, and even foreseen by frequently checking your threat meter at the beginning of combat. Going back on what I said in the beginning, if this is a 5-man heroic and there is a small risk of extra mobs being pulled, I always want to have something reserved for that time when the inevitable happens and more mobs are pulled. Most of the time using Mocking Banner is fine. Just plonk it down in a vague area and wait for the first AoE taunt tick and the mobs will come running to you. This may also be a good time to use a defensive ability. If you don't have the luxury of Mocking Banner, or like me, you tend to use it offensively to pull more mobs earlier, you would need to rely on either having Heroic Leap on cooldown and hitting all the mobs. If you missed one, then you can simply taunt it or shield slam it, or intervene the player the mobs are running to if you are out of range from the mobs that I've pulled, then use some melee attacks or just be closer enough to Thunderclap and Shockwave. Heroic Leap is the easiest in my opinion, as you travel a large distance and have a nice amount of threat on the mobs if they're grouped. If you can't Heroic Leap, then you can charge one of them and then follow it off with either Thunderclap or Shockwave. And if every spell is on cooldown and you can't do anything other than instant spells, run over to the mobs, hopefully with some rage, and tab Devastate on all the mobs, trying to cleave when possible. Even white hitting can sometimes do more damage than a heal over time on you from the healer. The chances that every spell is on cooldown is slim to zero, so you would almost always have something such as a taunt, thunderclap, or as final resort, intimidating shout just to spread the mobs. Extra things I like to take into the equation are: charging a caster will increase the likelihood of all mobs being in one clumped up group, so every mob is in range of your AoE. If there are 2 casters, heroic leap into as many of them as possible, whilst pummeling the first caster, and then charge the second. The first pummeled caster should now be running to you to join you and the second caster, with melee running after you as well. If there are more than 3 casters, or you don't feel like pummel charging, then you can tell your group in chat that you are going to line of sight pull, also known as LOS, which means you're going to pull the mobs or be misdirected from a DPS in the group, and run behind a solid wall once combat has been established. All melee will run to you as normal, but the casters will not be able to attack you because you will be out of line of sight, forcing them to run towards you until they have a clear shot of you. So stand just on the corner of whatever it is you're hiding behind, so there are melee range for your cleaves and revengers. Even if you have threat of everything and the mobs are spread out, take time to think of others in your group, and group up the mobs as best you can, as having them stacked will not only increase your damage, but also the whole group's. One of my favourite things about tanking multiple mobs, or even multiple mob packs, is the greater risk of death. Be aware that in 5-man heroics especially, you can easily take more damage on trash than a boss. So use your cooldowns accordingly, and don't forget that you'll often be getting killing blows in 5-mans, so using Victory Rush when you need it for 20 seconds of activation time. And only use it when you actually benefit from the heal, otherwise Devastate is a better global filler. And of course, if you can guarantee there is no risk of pulling any additional mobs, you don't need to potentially save the cooldown on any spells, and you can use, like I said before, Mocking Banner to perhaps pull another pack. Say you use your heroic throw and you've already charged a pack and you want to pull more adds towards you, or you want to play it really safe and on the pull you can pop down your Mocking Banner. Say if you've done an instance several times and perhaps one individual mob pack is giving you a bit of trouble with regards to threat, maybe you know that the pack often is pulled with extra mobs and you want to just cancel that out altogether, even if you might not always pull it. You can play it safe by popping down your Mocking Banner early, or if you're just putting loads and loads of mobs, you can use your Mocking Banner. Also, if you do, like me, tend to pull the entire room at once, that's a good time when you can use Mocking Banner. Additionally, just heroic leap every single cooldown, and it can be beneficial to just wait even with your Thunderclap. I know I said you can wait with your Shockwave for the time when all the mobs are in the sweet spot. You can also do this with Thunderclap just to make sure you hit every single target with your Thunderclap. Interrupt rotation. No rotation guide is complete without going through the interrupt rotation. The priority is pummel, spell reflection, then heroic throw if glyphed for gag order. Obviously, if the spell can't be reflected, forget spell reflection. However, if the target is stunnable, you can interrupt with shockwave, charge, and stormbolt. Glyphs. Like with any glyph choice, it depends on the encounter. The best advice I can give is begin with a generic glyph setup or something you feel comfortable with for each scenario, and every time you kill a boss or are progressing on a new one, try and mix things up a little until you hit a sweet spot. Depending on your playstyle, raid comp, or skill level, this might be something from a different warrior. These are the glyphs you can use as a tank that I've not previously spoken about. Heavy repercussions. While shield block is active, your shield slam hits for an additional 50%. Only worth using if you plan on using shield block a lot. For those encounters when you're going to be defensive using shield block but also want to hit harder with shield slam. Hold the line. Improves the damage of your next revenge by 50% following a successful parry. Useless against spellcasters, this glyph will improve your threat and damage whilst tanking melee. Glyph of Recklessness. Decreases the critical chance of Recklessness by 20%, but increasing its duration by 50%. For those times when you care less about burst damage but still want to be aggressive. Glyph of Shield Slam. Your Shield Slam now dispels one magical effect. Most buffed bosses are undispellable, so not that desirable. Shield Wall. Now reduces damage taken by an additional 20%, but increasing its cooldown by 2 minutes, totaling a 4-minute cooldown. Used for encounters with tank killing mechanics for those times when you fear for your life. Depending on the fight, you may choose to grab this or not. It depends on your tank role and the times you are taking extra damage or receiving fewer heals. For example, if the boss would one-shot you every 60 seconds, you can use Shield Wall to prevent every other, and Demo Shout or Demo Banner and Last Stand for the other one. This would be used when Shield Wall is unglyphed. Insight. Glyph of Insight. Using Devastate during Deadly Calm reduces the cost of Heroic Strike and Cleave by an additional 20% rage, meaning Heroic Strike and Cleave cost no rage. This is used when damage or threat is required. Glyph of Spell Reflection. Reduces the cooldown on your spell reflection by 5 seconds. Some spells that are not reflectable but are absorbed instead, so good for taking less spell damage when it works. Against spellcasters this can reduce damage taken, but for the vast Against spellcasters this can reduce damage taken by a lot, but for the vast majority of boss tanking this won't be used. Glyph of Unending Rage. A great glyph increasing maximum rage by 20, totaling 120, guaranteeing you at least 2 blocks or 2 maxed rage costing barriers. A must have for times when taking lots of damage or stacking rage for extra aggression. Glyph of Victory Rush. Increases the healing provided by Victory Rush or impending victory following a kill by 50%. Great for 5-mans when you're getting killing blows or solo tanking. The only non-cosmetic minor glyphs are Intimidating Shout, which I've spoken about, or Bloody Healing, which increases healing you receive from bandages by 20% whilst Deep Wounds is active. This continues even if the target from Deep Wounds is dead. Glyph of Shield Slam. Your Shield Slam now dispels one magical effect. Most bosses... Glyph of Shield Slam. Your Shield Slam now dispels one magical effect. Most bosses have an... Glyph of Shield Slam. Your Shield Slam now dispels one magical effect. Most buffed bosses are undispellable, so not that desirable. Glyph of Shield Wall. Now reduces damage taken by an additional 20%, but increasing the cooldown by 2 minutes, totaling 4-minute cooldown. During an encounter, if you're only using Shield Wall once, this glyph could have saved your... What the fuck did I write down here? Glyph of Shield Wall. Now reduces damage taken by an additional 20%, but increasing... Glyph of Shield Wall. Now reduces damage taken by an additional 20%, but increasing its cooldown by 2 minutes, totaling 4 minutes. Used for encounters with tank killing mechanics for those times when you fear for your life. Depending on the fight, you may choose to grab this or not. It depends on what your tanking role is and the times you are taking extra damage or receiving fewer heals. Glyph of Deadly Calm. Using Devastate during Deadly Calm reduces the cost of Heroic Strike and Cleave by an additional 20%, meaning Heroic Strike and Cleave cost nothing. This is used when damage or threat is required. Glyph of Spell Reflection. Reduces the cooldown on Spell Reflection by 5 seconds. Some spells are not reflectable but are absorbed instead, so good for taking less spell damage when it works. Against spellcasters, it can reduce damage taken, but the vast majority of boss tanking, this won't be used. Glyph of Unending Rage. A great glyph maximising rage by 20, totaling 120, guaranteeing you at least 2 blocks or 2 max rage costing barriers. A must have for times of taking lots of damage or stacking rage for extra aggression. Victory Rush. Glyph of Victory Rush. Increasing the healing provided by Victory Rush or impending victory following a kill by 50%. Great for 5-mans when you're getting lots of killing blows or solo tanking. The only non-cosmetic minor glyphs are Intimidating Shout, which I've spoken about, or Bloody Healing, which increases the healing you receive from bandages by 20% whilst Deep Wounds is active. This continues even if the Deep Wounds target is dead. Glyph Example Setups. Boss solo tanking. You want as much rage as possible at all times to spend on barriers and blocks. Unending Rage will help you do this. Assuming there aren't multiple times when you need to rely on Shield Wall, Glyph of Shield Wall is often recommended. The third glyph is more situational, like using Resonating Power when keeping weakened blows up will increase the damage of Thunderclap, but charge glyphs like Bull Rush can be a dream on the pull for initial threat boost or shield barrier block. AoE glyphs. Hold the Line. Hold the Line. Heavily AoE glyphs. Hold the Line. This glyph will heavily increase your damage and threat when spamming Revenge. Death from Above. Doubling the damage of your heroic leap is never a bad thing, and even better when the cooldown is halved. Like the boss solo tanking glyph setup, the third glyph is more situational. Resonating Power can be great if you don't need to rely on Thunderclap for picking up any stray mobs. Increasing the cooldown means using it less often, which is a two-sided sword. You have globals by not having to use it as often while maintaining the same damage and threat. But one of the best things about Thunderclap is its short cooldown for grabbing snap aggro. If you can live with the longer cooldown and are wondering which glyph to get, this can surprise you in terms of burst threat and damage. Talents. I've already spoken about the charge talents, but to briefly recap, Juggernaut's good if you want a sustained 12-second cooldown charge. Double Time has the most usability and generally speaking will be the talent which you go for most often. It has more utility because you can charge more frequently, especially at the beginning of combat when you need to maybe leap, intervene, charge all over the place to pick up stray mobs whilst tanking. Double Time is generally my favourite talent. We also have Warbringer, which means that the target will be stunned. It's really good for kiting, but generally speaking, you know, Double Time is the go-to talent, as it were. So level 30, we have our healing abilities. We have Enraged Regeneration, which requires 30 rage and will instantly heal us for 10% health and then 10% over 10 seconds. Can be used while stunned, costs no rage if used while enraged. The only thing that I will say that sucks about this talent is if you don't have Berserker Rage ready, it's really nice to macro into, slash cast Berserker Rage slash cast Enraged Regeneration to make sure that you are enraged whilst using Enraged Regeneration, because if you try and use it whilst you are not enraged, you will not be able to use the ability for free. It will cost you 30 rage, which isn't a huge deal, but I mean, like, you'd rather have it cost nothing because you want to use that rage on shield blocks and shield barriers. So, you know, weigh up the pros and cons, and it does depend on which encounter. There are several encounters where you do want an instant 10% heal followed by, you know, a 10% buffer, so to speak, for 5 seconds. So it's a talent worth thinking about before attempting a boss. Similarly to Second Wind and the rest of the healing talents, Impending Victory as well, they're all good for their own reasons, and it depends what encounter you're doing. So Second Wind, whenever you are below 35% health, you will regenerate 3% health per second. Whenever you are struck or mobilized, you generate 15 rage over 10 seconds. So you don't generally get stunned so much as a tank, although there are scenarios where you do. You generally won't be tanking the boss because when you're stunned you can't dodge, block, parry, and you're going to get like one shot basically, or two shot. So you don't need to worry too much about the stun unless you're in like a 5-man and you are getting stunned. Again, for certain encounters you drop below 30% health or 35% health frequently, and the heal becomes very, very nice, especially when you are taking a low amount of damage. Say you're doing like low level content or soloing, you know, an old 5-man or something, and the mobs aren't damaging you more than 3% of your health a second. Once you drop below 35% health, you'll basically become like invincible, if you know what I mean, because you'll always be healed for the damage that you're taking. So when you're taking a small amount of damage, once you drop below 35% health, it becomes a really nice buffer of health. And there are definitely encounters where that happens. Say that there's some sort of phase where everyone's taking AoE damage, you can basically just ignore healing the warriors, because they'll just heal themselves with this talent. Next we have Impending Victory, which will heal you for 10% of your maximum health. I must stress that Impending Victory has a 60-second cooldown, whereas Enraged Regeneration has a 1-minute cooldown. So you get the exact same amount of heal. Enraged Regeneration heals you for 20% in total for a 1-minute cooldown, and Impending Victory heals you for a total of 10% with a 30-second cooldown. However, upon receiving a kill that yields experience or honor, it resets the cooldown of Impending Victory and causes your next Impending Victory to heal for 20% instead of 10. So Impending Victory can be really good for 5-mans if you're doing a lot of damage, but most importantly getting killing blows, because you're able to heal yourself even more. Although if you've got a good healer, you know, you don't need to worry about it so much, because you know you'll just get healed through, and then you can go for things like Enraged Regeneration, which is like a oh shit moment, or Second Wind, which will just, you know, you don't have to worry about Second Wind. But don't get into the mindset of, oh, I'll always go for Second Wind, because it's pretty good, which it is, and it means I don't have to have an extra button to worry about. You know, I can just forget about my level 30 talents and just, you know, have Second Wind healing me, and it'll always, you know, I'll never fail, I'll never, you know, not use it. Whereas if you've got like something like Impending Victory, and if you just never used Impending Victory, then obviously it becomes pointless. But you know, if you do get Enraged Regeneration or Impending Victory, make sure you actually use those binds, use those buttons, use those spells. So yeah, like level 30 Second Wind is generally like the kind of like the go-to, but in fights where you're getting hit like really, really hard, go for Enraged Regeneration. You will not regret it, because obviously if you get hit really hard, Second Wind just won't be able to heal you up in time.